Well, this is my first video in the post-election interim. Of course, I live in the United States, and everyone was fixated on the election between Donald Trump and that other guy. I forget. Donald Trump expected that there would be voter fraud, and he voiced his concern many times about the mail-in ballots and all of that. And there's something else that has come to light. That there is a computer program that was designed by the CIA, of all people, called the Hammer and the Scorecard. I was reading about it the other day, and apparently when votes are being sent to wherever, this program can snatch the data bits and change them. And of course, the CIA used that on other countries, apparently, and well, we'll see. The media, of course, it is so obvious that there's no real independent journalism anymore. I don't know if there ever was, but the companies on the big mainstream media. I mean, look at for years, three years, they ran this story that Trump colluded with Russia and they hacked the Democratic email server and all that. And it was proven totally false. And now it's the opposite. They said there's no fraud. This crazy conspiracy theories. Move on. We've got a new president here. Except, I don't know. I don't know if very many people outside of the United States are aware of this, and probably a lot of Americans aren't either, because they've just gotten so dumbed down, But there is, the election took place on November 4th, but the Electoral College, so-called, is a number of representatives from each state that are chosen by their party. They are entrusted with that vote from their precincts, constituents, whatever. And then I think it's December the 14th, the Electoral College convenes and they actually cast their vote. So a lot can happen between now and then. And if it becomes, even with the media blackout, if it becomes apparent that there is massive fraud, some of these Electoral College guys might swing their vote. And that would be very, very interesting. As it stands, I mean, there hasn't been any upheaval. It's funny, the mainstream media is like, okay, just accept it, get on with it. Stop crying. And not that I don't have a dog in this race, but my point of view is from prophecy, of course. And all of this is really a reflection of the king of the north and the king of the south. The iron and the clay not melding together. The empire, the British Empire, has made it known that they want this new Green Deal, which is a cynical takeoff on President Roosevelt's New Deal, which came about during the Depression, that lifted the forgotten man up. A lot of the great infrastructure projects were undertaken during the Depression, and he put some of the economic royalists in jail for trying to sabotage the economy of the United States. And of course, then came World War II. And after that, the United States was just, boom, gangbusters, the 50s and 60s. And Anyway, I won't go off onto a tangent there, but the British Empire it really is a well, like all empires, they plunder other nations and peoples. You know, that's how the Babylonians did it. They just went in with brute force and give me your gold and your silver. Hey, we might let you live. Just give us your stuff. You know, it's a lot of work killing people back then, but now they do it much more well sophisticatedly. Right? They can dispossess people through financial means, through financial crashes and so forth. But the city of London has made it known that they're, and all the banks allied with the city of London are in on this, that they're going to withhold credit to any company engaged in, emitting greenhouse gases. And when you think about it, I mean, that is, well, farm tractors and combines and all that, they depend on diesel. And I mean, a lot of people don't think this through, but there are some, I think, very, very clever, shrewd people that they know that the outcome of that will be a drastic population reduction, famine, and billions of people. If you withdraw credit and companies like John Deere can't produce their equipment anymore, what are you going to have electric combines all of a sudden? I mean, come on. No, but the British Empire for 150 years their official policy is there's too many people. Back before the first billion, there's too many people. We have to, at some point, war is not enough. Pandemic is not enough. We need drastic population reduction because it's getting harder and harder to manage all these critters. That's the oligarchic thinking. And so Donald Trump isn't on board with that policy. He wants to make America first. He withdrew America from the Paris Climate Accord, which had a lot of stipulations about, throttling industry. It produces too much smoke and gas and all of that. So they were after Trump from the get-go, and they couldn't take him down with, the impeachment and all, this barrage of legal assault against him in the media. But now they got him. He's voted out, seemingly. Unless. I'm thinking, as I'm looking at this, I don't think the United States will just acquiesce to this new Green Deal and socialism and all that and go out with a whimper. I don't see that happening. I think it's interesting, the other day, Donald Trump fired his defense secretary. Now, why would you fire a high-level cabinet member a few weeks before your whole administration is going to turn everything over? Why would you do that? It makes no sense. Unless his defense secretary, by the way, was a deep state guy. That expression, deep state, is really it means that they're aligned with the empire. They're not, really patriotic, loyal to the United States, but they have other allegiances, whether they know it or not. Right? So, but his former defense secretary that he sacked was against using the military to quell the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots, which were, as you know, torching cities like Minneapolis and Chicago and Philadelphia and Portland and Seattle. So he's got a guy now who is loyal to him. He's a counter-terrorist expert and an ex-Green Beret. When I read that, I was like, oh man, they're going to fight. They're going to fight. They're not going to hand over the keys to the administration, and they're going to probably reveal one of the guys that was involved in the Russia hoax, ex-chief of the CIA, called for Donald Trump to be sacked immediately, not in 2 months when the new president. Now, why? Because he might do a data dump, and some of these guys, I mean, you have to realize they're fighting for their lives because they know they could be guilty of treason. And why no one has been arrested yet is that a lot of people are scratching their heads. But a lot of people in the FBI, the CIA, and in government and politics could be arrested and charged. And I suspect Trump is going to pull something like that. And heads will explode. I mean, there will be a social explosion like you wouldn't believe. And I think that's where we're heading. We'll find out shortly. But the reason, my perspective again on prophecy, it's been a while now, almost a quarter of a century. And one day I picked up the Bible and started reading, and I've told this story before. And I even started in the middle of Ezekiel and read, the fall of Tyre and Egypt, and I kept reading over and over. Days went on, I kept rereading it. Does that make sense? What? And looking back, it went on for a few months. It was as if Jehovah just plunked me down in a chair and said, read this. And don't get up till I tell you to, So anyway, I discerned from chapters, 29, 30, 31, 32, that Egypt, it symbolizes the United States. And, I can't go into it all right now, but, as the basis of the chapter in the book, Downfall of America, and of course I've done other subsequent articles. What Egypt is likened to this towering cedar, and all the nations wanted to live under its shade. Like America. People want to come here, and it's freedom, and you can make money, but Jehovah gives the order to have it chopped down. Well, it's interesting. The 19th chapter of Isaiah has a prophecy against Egypt as well. And I'm not talking about the Egypt when Moses and the Israelites came out of Egypt, because Egypt recovered from the devastating blows that Jehovah leveled against them. And it became a world power again, a regional power. And it was vying with Assyria and Babylon for supremacy, and it lost out. But in the 19th chapter of Isaiah, it says, this is the pronouncement against Egypt. Look, Jehovah is riding on a swift cloud and is coming into Egypt. The worthless gods of Egypt will tremble before him, and the heart of Egypt will melt within it. Well, people would say, well, the United States is a Christian nation, right? So-called, right. It's interesting that every church believes in the Trinity, and that Jesus is God and Father. I mean, it's all a big, confusing mess, but that is their God, Jesus and the threesome. And you know where that came from? The Egyptians had a triad. Osiris and his wife Isis and their son Horus. That was their trinity. So the worthless gods of Egypt will tremble before him. The worthless gods of America will tremble as well. their Jesus mascot, he won't be any good. But this is interesting. Now keep in mind, when Jehovah brought this judgment, it was as if he was riding on a swift cloud, but he was actually foretelling that human armies were going to do the work. But then he says in verse 2, I will incite Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will fight one another, each against his brother and his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of Egypt will become bewildered within it, and I will confuse its plans. They will resort to the worthless gods, to the charmers and the spirit mediums and fortune tellers, to the Jesus, the Trinitarian Jesus. But Jehovah was foretelling that he would incite them to a civil war. Well, I understood that years ago, and I was like, it's hard to see. I don't see how that could ever happen in the United States. They had one big civil war, right? And that was a mess. But now more and more people are talking about it. And some are saying it is virtually inevitable because the extremes, people have been so polarized, left and right? And the injustices get magnified. And, if the scenario unfolds as I think it might, where Trump stays in office, there'll be there will be blood in the streets. Just the Antifa mobs, and people would just go crazy. And yeah. But notice verse 4 here. I will hand Egypt over to a hard master, and a harsh king will rule over them, declares the true Lord, Jehovah of armies. Well, people will say, well, that's ancient history. What relevance does that have? Well, all of Isaiah is about the coming of Christ. As I've been doing a series on that and refreshing articles that I'd written 10 years or so ago. But so Jehovah hands Egypt over to this hard master. And in the end, verse 19, it says, in that day there will be an altar to Jehovah in the middle of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to Jehovah at its boundary. And it will be a sign and a witness to Jehovah of armies in the land of Egypt. And they will cry out to Jehovah because of the oppressors. And he will send them a savior, a grand one, who will save them. Well, God didn't send any sort of savior to rescue the Jews in Egypt. As a matter of fact, when Babylon came and Jeremiah was in the besieged city, he told them, do not flee to Egypt for protection. Because a lot of the Jews had already been drug off to Babylon or killed, and the survivors, they were going to be allowed to survive. But no, they went down to Egypt. So Jehovah made sure that Babylon went down there and punish them. But no, this grand Savior is Christ. It's talking about the coming of Christ after the collapse of this modern Egypt. Now, let me share something else with you here. Excuse me. In the 32nd chapter of Ezekiel, in verse 3, Jehovah says that by means of an assembly of many nations, I will cast my net over you, and they will haul you up in my dragnet. An assembly of many nations. Globalism, right? For a long, long time, since the United States really broke away from the crown, and nations have respected national sovereignty, the empires wanted to do away with that. We want to get rid of this nation-state business and get back to the good old days of the feudal system. All right? Because Satan knows that he can wipe out Christianity easier that way. Right? Hey, look, Jehovah has allowed this system as a check and balance against Satan's total tyranny. You know, when the angel was relating he was about to relate the prophecy of the king of the north and the south, he told Daniel that he stood up as a strengthener to the king of Persia. Well, we know that Jehovah used Cyrus, the Persian, to topple Babylon, but other kings, Darius, Ahasuerus, were used by God to benefit his people. So even though they were captive in Persia after Babylon fell, those kings dealt kindly with them. In fact, Esther was married to the king, right? And Daniel was elevated to the co-ruler, you might say, in Persia. But Jehovah did that to benefit the Jews, so they could go back to their homeland and restore the worship of Jehovah there. So think about that. The angel stood up to strengthen this pagan king. And I think that's exactly what has happened with the United States. The original settlers were pilgrims fleeing the tyranny of the Church of England and the Catholic Church. And they came with their just printed King James Bible, and they wanted to establish a country that respected freedom of religion, freedom of the press. We take all those things for granted, but it was a novel thing. And their offspring were the founding fathers who developed this system that protected. And of course, it was a ripe seedbed when the Watchtower came along in the late 1800s. And Jehovah used them mightily to accomplish his work and throughout the world because of the freedoms guaranteed. But that's all over with the coming of Christ. Jehovah had strengthened this nation. God blessed America, past tense. It's over now. He's going to deliver it up to a hard master. And we'll go into the next phase during the time of the end and the conclusion. Well, let me go back to that 32nd chapter because, again, people might think, well, that's this doesn't make any. It's not relevant for us. Well, so he cast his net, and he says, "I will abandon you on the land and cast you into the open field." I should go back up because this really kind of sets the stage. Ezekiel's to make a dirge for the passing of the Pharaoh, and he said, "Say to him, you were like a strong young lion of the nations, but you have been silenced." Remember in Revelation, there's seven-headed beast, the mouth of a lion. You are like a sea monster. The whole beast comes up out of the abyss, right? Thrashing about in your rivers, muddying the waters with your feet, and so on. Okay, so he's talking to this beast, and he says, "I will cast your flesh on the mountains and fill the valleys with your remains. I will drench the land with your gushing blood up to the mountains, and it will fill the streams." So, what does that portend? Well, it has relevance. Let me tell you the next verse, verse 7. "And when you are extinguished, I will cover the heavens and darken their stars, and I will cover the sun with clouds, and the moon will not give its light. I will darken all the shining luminaries in the heavens because of you. And I will cover your land with darkness, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah." Well, Jehovah literally did cover the land in darkness during the time of Moses and Pharaoh. But again, this is not talking about that. And Obviously, Jehovah's using apocalyptic phraseology. When the Babylonians went into Egypt, the stars didn't stop shining and the sun didn't go dark. But that is the exact same phraseology Jesus used when he spoke about the conclusion and the tribulation. And immediately after the tribulation, the sun will go dark, the moon will turn to blood, and the stars of heaven will fall. That's what we're talking about. Egypt, the United States, going down in a tremendous crash, with nothing left of it, and from the ashes will arise this tyrant who will make war against the holy ones and come all the way to his end. Yeah. Yeah, but we'll see what goes down in the next few weeks, because you don't have to be a Bible reader to recognize that we're at a historic turning point. And it's not Republicans or Democrats. It's not even empire or republic. It's Jesus Christ and Satan. And it's going to be an epic transition. Hopefully I have more to say about that going forward. Thanks for watching.